If you're watching NewsX, I'm Rishabh Gulati. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed a great example of British munificence, charity, good deed. We should all bow and sing God Save the King. So what is this great symbol of British efforts to bring upon a sense of closure, truth and reconciliation in the world? For the hundreds of years, they were looting large parts of Asia and Africa. Well, the story goes into modern day Ghana. A couple of hundred years ago, the home of the Ashanti Kingdom. From the 1820s to the 1830s onwards, all the way up until the Boer War began in South Africa, the British waged war against the Asantis. They captured a hoard of their royal jewels and then kept them in the British Museum for more than 100 years. Now they've returned them. So you'll be thinking, it's a slow clap, good show, well done, what ho. But they're not giving them back. They've been given on a 6-year loan. So I come to your house, I steal your goods, I steal your jewelry, and then when you ask it back, I say, no, this is now my jewelry, okay? I can loan it to you for a few years. Wow. Epic. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we get chances of conversation sometimes. And let's have it here. Let's put this touchscreen on our... Okay. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the throne of the Sikhs. And if you know your history, you'll know it was the Sikhs who fought the last and the greatest battles against the occupation by the British of India. The last one being fought, known as the Battle of Chillianwala. I would recommend all of you Google and read that, where the British pretty much lost and would have been thrown out if a little bit of more deftness was shown in the battle aftermath. So this is the throne of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. This is the Sikh throne. Absolutely magnificent. You can imagine the value this has in the history of India, the value it has to the Sikhs. It's gold-plated, so you can imagine the sheer monetary value of this into the hundreds of crores. Is lying where? In the British Museum. Okay, I mentioned this specifically because we all keep otherwise parochially thinking only of the Kohinoor. Robert Clive, this is the British Museum, so this is the public display. Robert Clive's house is still there in England, and everything he took from India, it's all there. This is just the British Museum. I'm not even mentioning Windsor Castle, loot after loot that they took is all lying there. And now we know what the pattern is going to be. They might be gracious enough to loan it back to us. So if we really try hard and we, really do well with the future British governments, they might be so decent as if to loan back Maharaja Ranjit Singh throne back to India. So decent of them. Maybe all the protests that keep happening in London, forget who the real luteras actually were. Let me open up this conversation to what actually needs to get done. And how do we get it done? This has been a conversation for 80 years. It's becoming a joke. Joining us on the broadcast, Ambassador Basmati Mukherjee is with us, Patikrit is with us, Surinder Singh Lali is with us, and Rashmi Samant joining us on the broadcast. The last two of them, of course, have been in the UK. Laliji, let me begin with you, sir, because I've begun specifically because we always talk about the Kohinoor and the Kohinoor, okay? We forget that not only the monetary value of a diamond, but the significance of the Sikh throne sitting in London. What's it doing in London, sir?
Vineet, I wish to start. Rishabh, I want to start on a note of levity. I remember seeing a stand-up comedian once, and pun intended, he says that, oh my God, the British are so generous. They created the Commonwealth Games because that's the only way we could win the gold medals back from the colonizer and take them back to our country. So, Rishabh, what amazes me is that there is no reference. I've made over 50 trips in my life to London, England, and all across. And the contribution that the Sikhs did for the First and the Second World War, there is absolutely no reference. Forget about the atrocities by the British in India. They have actually very smartly insulated their population of not at all sensitizing them or letting them know, because this could be the white man's burden, which they might not be able to deal. But in today's debate, Rishabh, I want to come as a convener of the Export Promotion Council of India, as a North Indian convener. The trap is still there. I'm going to now spell out a few abbreviations, which are some of the, pretty much like the IMFs and the World Banks and the environmental lobbies. These are organizations and checks that these European Union in specific has created to still keep us in check. REACH, R-E-A-C-H, which means registration, evaluation, authorization of restricted chemicals to the European Union. SEDEX, BSCI, SA8000. Now, the beauty is that after plundering a country for 200 years, they go back, and now if we have to be on the suppliers list to any of the reputed stores where we get the mass orders, we have to comply by all of these standards, which is fine. Why not? But the beauty is that all these standards compel us once again to buy the raw materials and the chemicals from companies that are based out of England and the European Union. So, until the GST wasn't out, can you imagine we were working under 28 government departments and trying to comply by the standards which were set by them, and in order to come through and to have a product to be eligible to go back into their country, we still had to get those tests passed. So this mafia, I would love to call it, is still on.
Yeah, Mr. Lali, I'm sure the British had equally excruciating health and safety standards for any chemical malpractice when they were shipping the opium into China as well. So I'm sure they were being very careful that the opium was very pure. It was a good quality. They weren't sending sasta mal per se. But that brings us back to attitude. What is our attitude? What have we actually really seriously done to get these treasures back for us, the Africans, the Egyptians? We are all in the same boat here. What is our attitude? I've never really seen a consistent effort by anyone.
Rishabh, as I often say, even about my parents, sometimes there is a generational gap between my parents and us and the likes. And I'm sure your parents and grandparents also came from Pakistan. We spent the first 25, 30, 40 years simply working on bread and butter and moving out and creating basic infrastructure and roads. I think now the time has come with the new aspirational Indians, the aware Indians, and thanks to us being a soft power, I think now we're going to give it back to them piece by piece, being in the parentheses on the law and being politically correct. Because one thing the Britishers have taught us, which is the art of saying no, which is the art of being politically correct. They wouldn't say, oh, this is shitty. They'd say, oh, if I were you, I wouldn't do this. Or the Americans, the new thing that they've given to the world after all that havoc they've created, I am neither eligible to comment or non-comment on this. This is how they've dealt. But I think the time has come, and I think we have started giving back. The last war, which is still going on, we bought oil at our own terms. America's trying to penalize us through proxy organizations and creating these, fringe rogue pannus.
Like I said, none of those fringe groups seem to be very bothered with the fact that the Sikh throne is sitting in London, which is not traditionally known to be the homeland of the Sikhs. I think there's a geographical confusion against some of those operating in London who think that London is home and hearth. And they've forgotten where their roots are from. Let me quickly get Ambassador Mukherjee into this.
Can I just come in for 1 minute?
Yeah, please. I want to get the others as well.
The way people are moving from Punjab, I mean, take this with a pinch of salt. I wouldn't be surprised that the new Punjabi capital will be somewhere in Canada or in South.
No, they're free to have it. They're free to have it. Vancouver, great place. Surrey in Canada, great place. We wish those people the best. But I'm going to come back to the point very rapidly. Ambassador Mukherjee, so now let's take the premise in itself, for example. So now we know beyond doubt that these are not British artifacts. These were not made by the British. They were looted by the British from Ghana, from the Asante Kingdom in the 1800s during the Anglo-Asante Wars. Now, can they simply say that when we return them, it's just a loan?
No, actually, Rishabh, there is a UNESCO convention which talks about return of cultural property to their places of origin. Because you were asking that, for instance, what has India done? India has actually done a lot, because apart from the Sikh throne, you also have the Kalgi of Maharaja Ranjit Singh,
yes,
which actually we discovered in the VNA when I was Joint Secretary Europe West, and against my advice, the then Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaswant Singh, called in the British High Commissioner. I told him that's a rotten idea because it will disappear. I'm not an astrologer, but indeed, the very next morning, the Indian High Commission informed me that why on earth did you go and tell the British High Commissioner that Kalgi has disappeared? We suspect that it must be lying in the basement of the VNA where it will lie for the next 25, 30 years till we forget about it. So the first issue here, Rishabh, that I want to bring to your attention is we have systematically tried, including through the UNESCO Convention, for return of our cultural property. We have collaborated with other colonized countries to do so. I have participated in a conference in UNESCO with the director of the British Museum, who told me, as India's ambassador to UNESCO, that, oh ma'am, why do you want these artifacts back? They're so much safer in the British Museum, because I'm not sure whether you guys really know how to preserve these artifacts. But if you wish, we could give you a virtual look-see, and you could put that virtual look-see in your national museum. So I said, why should I put a virtual look-see of my own heritage? We can give you a virtual look-see of our looted heritage when you return it to us. And he said, let's not talk about loot. That's such a nasty word. We actually did our subjects a very great favor when we took it in safe custody, and there it lies in all its magnificence, and the entire world comes to look at India's history through the lens of the British Museum. So what I'm trying to tell you is, Rishabh, they are totally shameless. They're never going to return it willingly.
Okay.
They will return it when they become a minor economic power. We put pressure on them, then they will return it, and when they will loan it to us for 6 years, we will keep the loan for 600.
No, but okay, so I'm trying to figure this out. Okay, so let's say there is a bronzed Buddha made in 550 AD. For 1200 years, it's just doing fine, made during the Gupta period, okay? For 1200 years, we are doing fine in preserving it. But then, the British come and tell us that they are going to preserve it better in the Birmingham Museum of Art. It's rather strange, you know? And there you have it. Yeah, it's more than rather strange. But Pathikrit, what do we do about it? Doesn't seem to be on a priority. I mean, Baswati ji is telling us about the meetings that have been held and the conventions that have happened. We can now see the Americans returning a lot of artifacts back to India. But those, ladies and gentlemen, are artifacts that have been black marketed in the recent decades. So black markets operate out of all historical countries, India, China, out of Iraq, out of Syria, out of Egypt. And the black markets, these are mafias, okay? These are gangsters. So when the Americans catch these hoards, when they go up for auction and they can't be verified where they come from, they've returned thousands of things. primarily because the Americans didn't loot them in the first place, but the British did. What do we do about this, Pathikrit?
So, Rishabh, yes, you are right. Around 200 artifacts have been brought back in the last 10 years, but mostly from the black market. You are right about this. Let me tell you what the British did to India and all the other colonies. They looted, of course, $45 trillion almost from India. They looted our culture, they looted our artifacts, and they destroyed our culture. From 1947 onwards, what did the parties which were in power for 50, 60 years, what did they do? They kept us in awe of the British and the West. So there was never a requirement in the mind. There was never this hunger that there should be a concerted movement to do something. Now, what has happened in the last 10 years, at least certain seeds have been sown of that. We have been trying to, go for what you call an economic renaissance. And almost we have touched the $4 trillion mark now. As per the World Economic Outlook, IMF reports $3.97 trillion now. Secondly, there has been a major effort made directly by the Prime Minister of the country of India to have cultural revival. So when you would have cultural revival, when you would have economic revival, your urge and the aspiration to bring back what was civilizationally yours would go up. That is something that is gradually moving up. Third, and a very important point, it is not just about bringing back the artifacts. I think all the countries and all those who are part of Commonwealth of Nations should ask the British for the reparation of not just the colonization and the enslavement, but every war that is happening in Africa and South Asia today has something to do with the partition that was done by these colonizers, a deliberate way done in a manner in which that there will be perpetual conflicts. So I think a lot more has to be done. But the positive sign for me is this, Rishabh, that in most countries, at least people, because their basics have been taken care of today, have started asking questions. And I feel it is rather obnoxious that Ambassador Mukherjee also mentioned. The British museums and British tourism will collapse if they actually give back everything.
because you and I have to now pay to go and see our own historical treasures in London to the British Museum. I've paid, and I didn't know this, right? Because let's face it, we are all anglicized in some part of it. So when you go, and I've heard about the Elgin marbles, and when you show up in the British Museum, ladies and gentlemen, along with the Elgin marbles, by the way, are after Lord Elgin, because he went to Greece and literally stripped the Parthenon of all its reliefs and took them to London. Right next to that, there is something called the Elliot marbles. Now, I didn't know this, that the Elliot marbles come from Amravati, okay? Supriya Sule's current constituency, as we speak, in Guntur in Andhra Pradesh. That is Baramati, my fault. And the Amravati marbles have been lying there for a couple of hundred years. They are the most exquisite carvings that you can imagine, okay, which were doing fine in India for a few hundred years, but the British felt it could be better. So Rashmi Sawant, now there is the gall of this, where we could have been celebrating a milestone of the return of the treasures to Ghana. Instead, we are discussing the farce of it being a loan. What does a loan mean, to the best of your knowledge?
Well, I think it's absolutely condescending, the very tone and the very words used is that they're doing Ghana a favor, and that it's somehow not the property of Ghana. So it's absolutely condescending, the typical British attitude. But I'd like to also add that, these public displays that we see in museums just scratch the surface of the extent of the loot.
Yeah.
The private collections
less than 10% we know about.
And yeah, exactly. The private collections are so huge and extensive. My own college had a great collection in our, dining room. And this is something that the public does not know about. And, it's extensive. And I'm glad that Ambassador Mukherjee brought up this point, because I thought I was delusional or I didn't hear it right when I took a tour of the Pitt Rivers Museum at Oxford. So I was going through, and it's a teaching museum where they teach students at Oxford how to preserve and, so on and so forth. So I asked them this question: isn't it a moral question for you to, pursue this line of studies? Because it's so wrong to kind of preserve things which were stolen and off of the back of, immeasurable violence in colonies, in former colonies. And then they say that, oh no, what's wrong in this? We're doing the colonies a favor because they're not in any way, shape, or form capable of maintaining their own history. We're doing them a favor by preserving it for them. They're poor, they don't know how to do this. So actually, I thought
I wonder what
heard
made them poor in the first place. Big question.
Exactly. I mean, but the gall to even think that, we are poor and still backward, that, we haven't yet come out of the poverty that they left us in. I think it's audacious. And, I was still under the impression that I had heard it wrong because it was such an audacious argument to make. And now that Ambassador Mukherjee actually brought this point up, it reminds me of the very conversation I had at Pitravers Museum at Oxford.
Yeah.
And for centuries now, the British have funded their elite institutions like Oxford and Cambridge to write history, a version of history, which actually justifies this loot and comes up with, misplaced responsibility for the violence which happened. So under all this context, I think the only way we can get back our loot is to economically dominate and then show them who's in charge, our foreign policy, our foreign presence. That's going to definitely compel them to return it, because all the processes of redressal that they've put in place are circular in fashion. It's just going to lead us on a wild pace.
Okay, I would think that there are other practical measures that can be taken, and let's examine them, because practicality is better than, of course, beating your chest and ululating about past injustices. Ambassador Mukherjee, to the best of your knowledge, is there a commission, a high-level commission operating that is actually tabulating what is available in the British Museum and the private museums and the Birmingham Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum and in so many others?
It has been done very discreetly by our High Commission in London. We are fully aware of what is on display. We can guess what they have put in the basement of both museums. And as Rashmi correctly pointed out, there are also large private collections where occasionally artifacts are put up for sale, and there you have the greatest indignity, where we have to then participate in the auction and buy it, like the glasses of Mahatma Gandhi, etc. That is the greatest irony of all, that a country whose heritage has been looted then has to participate in a public auction and spend public money to buy its heritage back. Apart from that, it is regularly taken up bilaterally with the British. It has been much more effective with the Australians and Americans who have sent some stuff back. I'm very sorry to report to you, Rishabh, that so far the British insularity, their arrogance and their patronizing approach towards India persists. And as I said, it's only when they become a small little economy, which they are very, very quickly on the way to becoming, only then will the pressure that we put on them have some kind of effect, because some stuff is gone forever. Like what they've put in the crown jewels is gone forever. We're never going to get it back. In any case, they chopped and cut and shaped the Kohinoor in a manner that was disgraceful. It was never supposed to be shaped and cut to 1/4 of its size, which is what they did, to make what they call the humongous stone fit into the crown. But for the rest, yes, we can put up a fight.
So what's stopping us, Mr. Lali? I mean, surely empowered commission needs to be set up. Okay, we have a new government being formed in this country in a couple of months' time that needs to at least tabulate what all is missing. They need to go down to Powys Castle and, as I mentioned, Birmingham and Victoria, Albert, open up the archives, and at least our effort in tabulation of what all is missing should be done. And surely this should not be an innocuous commission. Let it be full of the best known people who can make a wave and actually make this happen.
Rishabh, I feel every $1 trillion we add to our GDP will empower us more to be more brazen on bringing it back. But you know what, Rishabh, I think the problem is also still a bit inwards, because while I was just Googling, we still have Fair and Lovely Isal in India worth over $550 million. That's
but it's a vicious circle, Mr. Lali. Okay, the vicious circle is because you've been told for 200 years that you are an inferior race. It's only when you realize that actually no, You were building cities 5,000 years ago, okay? You had great wealth in this country, the best artists, the musicians, the best linguistic history, the best epics, the best poetry, the best science. And that can't happen if you can't see it and feel it.
Rishabh, as you said, we were told, but we also heard it. The subservient Indian, I mean, forget 200, even the 800 years before that, the Mughals came and plundered and divided the vulnerable Hindu civilization by playing on our religious cards. I mean, that's a different discussion for a different day. But yes, I mean, damage which was done in 200 years, we're gonna get back to it, and it's only a matter of when we have the economic might. I think if I remember, not the best example though, but Vijay Mallya had picked up Tipu Sultan's sword for, I think, 6 crore rupees.
Yeah, and for all we know, that's back in London with him.
Sorry?
For all we know, that's back in London.
Yeah, I mean, so is that.
Ironically.
That's criminal too. So I think they have him, Nirav Modi, and all the money back. And that's probably the reason why they don't extradite, because they're also acquiring a lot of our wealth through these Johnnies who find safe havens like the Russians in England.
Yeah.
So that's another way of them.
We know how the modern day practice works. I'm talking about the previous practice. Okay, Pathikrit, there has to be a step-by-step point. I mean, we can't just be sitting here twiddling our fingers in angst and anger. Surely, there are steps that we need to start taking where this can be done. It should be achievable. And it's just not about soft power, economic power. All that's going to happen anyway. Come back in 10 years. And yes, we will be double, triple the size of the UK GDP.
So two things, Rishabh. First of all, in the next 2-3 years, UK will be desperate for a trade agreement. Right now, they are pleading, but they will be desperate. When you sign the trade agreements, link it to the return of the artifacts. And they would do it. They would be compelled to do it, because otherwise niceties is not something that the hypocrites of British government would understand. Second is, do you see the discomfort in the West, especially in United Kingdom and some other Western countries, with the rise of Global South and the cultural connect that Global South is right now having with its civilizational past? Because as you stated rightly, and many others also stated, from 1947, decolonized India was never mentally decolonized. We were obsessed that British were great, they did something. Today, that realization is coming that culturally we were far more superior to them. So I think a mass movement will take time. It has started, but your economic and cultural revival has already started in India. So the third point, if you talk about in terms of, I'm sure as Ambassador Ma'am mentioned, the tabulation has been done. There are certain private organizations who are also working in this realm, but link it directly to your commercial agreements with the British government. That is the only thing they understand. That is only when they will act. Because in the next 5 years, I don't think the British government can survive without having
ladies and gentlemen,
agreement with us.
If you've been and take the opportunity to go to the National Museum in the national capital of Delhi, it has a poverty of artifacts. Most of the stories are being told by recently made paintings to depict what was there. Okay, a poverty of artifacts, primarily because they're all sitting in the British Museum. So Rashmi, surely we can come up with a step-by-step systematic plan. We need to have our own, infrastructure ready for sure to receive artifacts when they come. There has to be a commission that is doing it, okay? And the British Museum as an institution needs to be in principle be shut down. Let them show British artifacts. Let them discuss how they set up a few round stones in Stonehenge and talk about that and return the rest to everybody else.
You're absolutely right. And I think I was very happy to find this as a manifesto point for the 2024 elections of Prime Minister Modi. He's promised to actually form a task force. It was a very fine line that will actually survey the stolen artifacts and work towards bringing it back. I think a very concerted effort starting from survey to, diplomatic channeling and some sort of academic backing from our own academic departments of, anthropology and other study of history from across the country can actually aid in this whole process. We need to start the process. I think the commercial aspect of it, the economic aspect of it is already at our doorstep. So we need to utilize this to our advantage and actually start the very process of reparation, of bringing back the artifacts and then moving on to reparation.
Yeah, I marvel at the attitude of British diplomats who are sent to Delhi, knowing full well that this is a hypocritical joke, but still being able to talk to us by looking us in the eye. I marvel at the attitude. 80 years it's been, okay? 80 years. They've seen their GDP slip, but they won't let go of what they stole. It's in English language, the word is called greed. Greed hasn't left. It has been multi-generational. And ladies and gentlemen, if anybody is watching this in England, you can blame the atrocities of the Raj on generations past. You can blame the famines and Jallianwala Baghs to generations past and say, it wasn't us, we didn't do it. But when you're holding on to the loot, that's on you. That is you. You are doing it. When the Nazis did the same in Europe and took away all the statues and all the paintings, entire divisions were deployed in repatriating them to their original owners and museums. The movie has been made on the Monuments Men. Nazis said the same thing. We are preserving the heritage of lesser peoples. I thank my guests. We take a break. See you in a minute.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.